At his trial, Priebke claimed that he was not guilty of the charges. He denied that he was responsible for the massacre and argued instead that he was following a direct order from Hitler, an order that he believed at the time to be legitimate. However, it was clear from his 1946 interrogation by the British and from his 1994 ABC News interview that Priebke had admitted to actually murdering 2 of the hostages. This was undeniably a crime. However, in a decision that caused widespread outrage and protest in Italy, the judge ruled that Priebke was not guilty because the case had expired. On the 1st of August 1996, the judge ordered that 83-year-old Priebke should be immediately released. The court was blocked by over 7 hours by hundreds of enraged protesters. It appeared to world opinion that the Italian judiciary was condoning the commission of war crimes, which was a very serious blow to the nation's prestige. The prosecutors appealed the case, and Germany requested that Priebke be kept in jail until he could be extradited to stand trial for the personal murders that he had committed. Such were the howls of protest in the streets and in the press that the Italian Supreme Court was forced to intervene and declare that the original court was incompetent, and the prosecutor's appeal went through. Priebke was rearrested and placed back on trial. The Nuremberg trial established that the plea of superior orders was invalid as a defense plea in cases of war crimes. Priebke's entire defense rested on his assertion that he had only followed a direct order from his commander-in-chief, Adolf Hitler, and was therefore not responsible for the murders of the Italian hostages. The plea of superior orders is the most frequently raised defense in war crimes trials throughout modern history. Its rejection as a defense dates back to 1919, when an international commission was appointed to consider and report to the Allied powers on the question of the immunity of heads of state in respect to the conduct of the First World War. The commission stated, "We desire to say that civil and military authorities cannot be relieved from responsibility by the mere fact that a higher authority might have been convicted of the same offense." The German Code of Military Law stated that a soldier must execute all orders undeterred by the fear of legal consequences, but that this would not excuse him in cases where he must have known with certainty that the order was illegal. This ruling was upheld at the trial in Leipzig in 1921 of 2 U-boat officers who had ordered the machine gunning of shipwreck survivors in order to conceal the presence of their boat, as per their orders. The court ruled that a soldier was liable to be punished if he knowingly obeyed an order that involved a contravention of international law. Erich Priebke knew full well that rounding up largely innocent civilians and then shooting each one in the back of the head ran contrary to all accepted rules of war and of international law. However, Priebke was a member of an organization that considered itself to be above the law, and his hands were already red with the blood of Jews that he had illegally deported to be murdered in Poland. But the law, and even German law of the period, expressly forbade soldiers, and membership of the paramilitary SS made Priebke a member of the German armed forces from committing murder. The law was clear, quote, "A subordinate who obeyed the order of his superior officer was liable to punishment if it were known to him that such an order involved a contravention of the law." End quote. The German ruling in 1921 further demonstrates that any accusations that the Nuremberg trials was victor's justice are wrong. It was not a case of ex post facto legislation, but merely an enforcement of already well-established international law. No one doubts that the primary duty of any soldier is to obey orders, but a soldier has a right to disobey an illegal order. Priebke's defense, when challenged over this, fell back on the falsehood that if Priebke had refused to carry out the massacre, he would have been punished. In fact, several of the SS officers and men who were present around the Ardeatine Caves had grave doubts about what they were being asked to do, and some refused to shoot prisoners. They were not punished, but simply allowed to step aside after some argument. In fact, in one case, Priebke physically held an officer around the waist and forced him to point his weapon at a kneeling hostage and shoot him before releasing his grip. Priebke being a willing executioner and someone who coerced others into committing murder. Another officer present at the massacre, 37-year-old SS-Untersturmführer Gunther Amon, had also refused to kill a hostage. "I raised my submachine gun, but I was too afraid to fire," Amon later recalled. The other 4 Germans fired 1 shot each into the backs of the necks of the other 4 prisoners, who fell forward. Upon seeing the state in which I was in, another German pushed me out of the way and shot the prisoner I had been detailed to shoot. Armand was not punished in any way for his refusal to carry out this illegal order. The Nazi war machine certainly encouraged its troops to commit despicable and illegal acts of murder on all fronts, in direct contrast to the behaviour of most Allied troops. Lord Russell of Liverpool, author of the classic account of Nazi war crimes, The Scourge of the Swastika, and a former leading British military lawyer, drew an interesting comparison that is quite pertinent to the case of Erich Priebke and his cohorts. Quote, "If the soldier is to be regarded as nothing but an automaton, it follows that a young British platoon commander fighting in enemy territory, who was ordered by his colonel to march all the women and children into the village church, fill it with straw, and then set it on fire, as the Germans did in 1944 at Oradour-sur-Glane, has no alternative but to obey. I have yet to meet an officer in the British Army who would not unhesitatingly refuse to carry out such an order, and gladly face the consequences." End quote. The accepted rules of war do grant commanders the right to take measures against partisans, but they expressly forbid arbitrary methods. Hitler's order to round up and murder Italian hostages was arbitrary in the extreme, and therefore illegal under accepted and agreed international law. The other officer who had been in command during the Ardeatine Caves Massacre, SS Hauptsturmführer Karl Haas, was called by the Italian court as a witness. Once it became clear that Haas also had the blood of innocents on his hands, prosecutors prepared to bring charges against him also. In an extraordinary turn of events, Haas was discovered in agony in front of his hotel after an apparent attempt to flee from Italy had gone wrong. The 84-year-old had jumped from his first-floor hotel terrace and broken his pelvis. After recovering in hospital, Haas was placed on trial alongside Priebke. At the conclusion of his trial, Erich Priebke was sentenced to 15 years imprisonment, immediately reduced to 10 because of his age. In March 1998, the Italian Court of Appeal condemned Priebke to life imprisonment. This decision was upheld in November 1998. However, Priebke was not sent to prison to serve out his sentence. He was instead permitted to remain at home under house arrest in Rome. Karl Haas received a 10-year sentence in 1997, which was reduced to only 8 months, and he was released from custody immediately because of time served whilst on remand. Haas died a free man in Germany in 2004 at the age of 91. In March 1997, it was decided not to extradite Priebke to Germany to stand trial for the personal murders of 2 partisans who he had shot. Priebke had been extremely active in trying to appeal the sentences imposed upon him by the Italian court. He had a website that called for justice, and he received the very vocal support of several neo-Nazi groups in Germany. Priebke appealed his sentence to the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, where he claimed that he had no choice but to obey Hitler's order. But the fact that Priebke had also shot 5 more hostages than he was ordered to graphically and emphatically demonstrated his responsibility for the crimes that were committed in 1944, and his appeal was rejected. Priebke was not shy in outlining his anger concerning the perceived injustice that he felt that he had suffered at the hands of an Italian military court. He took issue with the entire war crimes process and remained very much an unreconstructed Nazi. Perhaps the most difficult thing is actually accepting one's destiny serenely, Priebke said in an interview in July 2004. I believe to have understood the meaning of my life, to battle right up until the end, in order to maintain high my self-esteem, the pride of belonging to my people, the Germans, who with their virtues and their defects I cannot and do not want to stop loving. Priebke continued. A world planned during the Yalta Conference, self-justified by the false trials of Tokyo, Nuremberg and others, staged along the way against those who refused to be manipulated into thinking in the new way. End quote. When confronted by his crimes, Priebke always attempted to justify his actions. Probably today's generations, those who had never fought a war, cannot understand, he said. We had to shoot at the Ardeatine Caves. We didn't do it out of hatred, he boldly stated. We had to do it following an unrefusable order which had come directly from Hitler himself. All I can say is that the reprisal was and is still today a legal practice in war." End quote. Erich Priebke died in Rome on the 11th of October 2013 at the age of 100. His last request was his body be returned to Argentina to be buried alongside his wife's, but the Argentine government refused. The Vatican also ordered that Priebke was to be denied a formal Catholic funeral ceremony. A funeral was held during which neo-Nazis clashed with anti-fascists, and the police seized Priebke's coffin, and it was later buried at a secret location near Rome. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also visit my video channel, Mark Felton Productions. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon, details in the description box below.